But yes, welcome everyone to our last day of the We Give Summit. We know this has been a jam-packed month of learning for many of you, and we're so excited to be presenting this important session today. The session is Meeting the Moments, Aligning with the Sustainable Development Goals for Wider Impact. So before I kick things off, I wanted to note some quick housekeeping. As this is a webinar format, please use the chat and send in questions to our panelists. There will be a little time at the end for live Q&A, but we want to make sure you get in your questions early. So please do that in the chat. But now I wanted to quickly introduce our esteemed panel. Our first speaker is Ina Breuer. She is the Executive Director of New England International Donors, which is a network of global philanthropists, investors, and family foundations. NEID's mission is to convene, educate, and empower donors to help community leaders across all 17 SDGs. She has vast experience in international conflict resolution and reconciliation, having previously worked with leaders across the Middle East, Central America, Northern Ireland, and the Balkans, previously as the Executive Director of Beyond Conflict. So we're so delighted to have her here today. Our next speaker is Dianne Calvi. She joined Village Enterprise as the president and CEO in 2010. Village Enterprise's mission is to end extreme poverty in rural Africa through entrepreneurship and innovation. She oversees strategic partnerships, innovations in technology, rigorous impact evaluation, and has been really instrumental in empowering a dedicated and talented local team across East Africa. She really has led this organization to tremendous growth over the past few years, and they've expanded to multiple countries across the continent. They've also launched their first development impact bond for poverty alleviation, and have completed a randomized controlled trial, which is an RCT, which is the gold standard of impact evaluation, which really proves the efficacy of their entrepreneurship program. So she's also a board member of Interaction and has written articles for The Hill, Huffington Post, Next Billion, the World Bank, and many other prominent national news outlets. So Dianne, thank you so much for being here today. We also have our moderator, Nick Deychakiwsky. He is the Senior Program Officer for the Mott Foundation. He works in 2 civil society program areas, enhancing community philanthropy and strengthening civic space. In the late 1990s, Nick moved to Ukraine, where he worked in various roles supporting democratic and economic reform before joining the Mott Foundation in 2000. Working in the foundation's former Prague office, he was responsible for grant making in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova up until about 2006. He subsequently managed the US and global nonprofit and philanthropic sector infrastructure and community philanthropy grant making. So quite a powerhouse here. Last but not least, he's also a board member of United Philanthropy Forum. So Nick, it's truly a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Fourth speaker is Veena Kandike. She is the Director of Grants Partnerships at Together Women Rise. Together Women Rise is a powerful community of women and allies dedicated to achieving global gender equality. As a Giving Circle network, they have hundreds of local chapters across the US where members learn about and advocate for gender equality issues. They give grants to organizations that empower women and girls in low-income countries, and ultimately they build community to forge meaningful connections that increase their strength and collective impact, which is what we love here at the We Give Summit. At Together Women Rise, she manages the grant cycles, she advises applicants, she works with grantees, and liaises with all their partners. Last but not least, she is also an adjunct instructor for Asian Studies at the Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. Wow, you know, what a bio. Last but not least, of course, we have Scott Jackson. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Global Impact. Their mission is to grow global philanthropy and build partnerships and resources for the world's most vulnerable people. To date, it has raised over $2 billion, and that's billion with a B, since its inception. Scott is a global development, fundraising, and marketing veteran. He's held leadership positions in the public, private, nonprofits, such as PATH and World Vision. And wow, this is quite impressive. He has also worked in more than 60 countries. So Scott has worked in all levels. And I would also encourage you to check out his book, Take Me With You, which is also in our We Give Summit store, check it out. It's on our online shop. So yes, go do some shopping today as well before the summit's over. Now, although those are all lengthy bios, I want to pass it off to this esteemed panel, Nick, to help kick us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kaisen, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at around the world. It's just a pleasure to be here. I just want to give a very quick kind of background framing before really turning it over to the speakers and hearing from Scott and Vina and Dianne and Ina. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, I'm assuming you're familiar with them, but just to give us a little refresher that they were adopted by the UN member states in 2015 as a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet. There are 17 measurable goals that are set. The idea is to achieve them by 2030. I would have loved to read them, but I want to give more space to the speakers. So they're on the screen behind me, and every so often I'll move my head over so you can read all of them as we move along. They grew out of an earlier effort of 8 Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, as you might be aware of that, which were set to be achieved by 2015, and some were and some weren't, but it was a useful effort. Let me quickly point out the difference between the MDGs and today's SDGs, right? One is that the MDGs were developed by UN experts, and the SDGs were a result of a very broad consultative process, including civil society actors. Around 1 million people around the world participated in developing them. The second is that the MDGs were specifically for developing countries, while the SDGs are universally applicable. Because we know that there are pockets of poverty or injustice or lack of development, and often, by the way, not just pockets, in developed societies as well, you know. And I think part of the dilemma in the US is sometimes Americans hear UN and we think it's something out there rather than something that is also applicable to us. A third difference is that there's a stress on the interoperability of the SDGs. There are 17 of them, it's a lot, but they're interrelated. And so even if you would be working on just one, you're probably working on several. And the SDGs give you a framework to be able to see and analyze that, so that could lead to a more wholesome response to whatever you're wanting to work on. And the fourth difference is that really SDGs are plunking the idea of equity at the center. Their central message, and a slogan that sometimes gets used, is that to leave no one behind. Now, within these goals, there are 169 targets, and within those targets, they incorporate 231 unique indicators, right? So it's a big deal. And back in 2015, the initial estimates were that it would take at least $20 trillion in spending to achieve these goals. Now, later on, recently, they're saying that the estimates are $3 trillion a year overall. So gosh, that's a lot, right? But and then the question is, so what role can philanthropy really play here? It seems like it's only something that national governments or very large corporations can do. But let's take stock here. We don't have global statistics on what overall philanthropic giving is around the world, but it is probably approaching about $1 trillion a year, right? So that's something that we have to bear in mind. But even so, it seems quite daunting. It seems so remote and distant and complicated. I mean, especially if you're a relatively small giving circle and you're counting in the hundreds or thousands and not trillions. So how do we use this to bring it home? The point is that no matter how small, you're probably already giving and supporting and working on achieving the SDGs, right? I'm going to give you a quick example from my own hometown of Flint, Michigan, which probably a lot of you heard about only because we had the big water problem, right? SDG 6 is to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, right? One of the targets is reads, by 2030 to improve water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating dumping, and minimizing the release of hazardous chemicals and materials, having the proportion of untreated wastewater and substantially increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. And then an indicator is proportion of wastewater safely treated. Well, that sure sounds like something only a government can do, or sometimes, as we know in Flint, it didn't do. So if we got a giving circle, we're giving small grants, what can we do, right? Well, we can look at that framework and say, okay, if we were, providing like money for bottled water to be purchased, maybe we might be able to provide water for something like kids testing the water supply in Flint and seeing whether, it's safe and clean. And if need be, they will then be able to put pressure on local authorities to say, wait a minute, it's not clean enough. So, and that's just a tiny illustration of how the SDGs might help you think and increase the impact of what you're doing. So the goal today, we're hoping to help you understand that connection a little bit better. I'm going to start with Scott, if I may, and start turning it over and stopping talking myself. Scott, could you share how you have seen a connection to the SDGs through your work at Global Impact?
Well, thank you, Nick. And I also want to just a shout out to Nick and all the panelists who represent the foundation, a non-governmental organization working on the goals in Africa, giving circles that have taken the SDG, the Global Goal Framework. Each of you are really connecting your own personal stories and your organizations to this massive but important global framework. So thank you for what you're doing every day. Just to kind of follow on to Nick's excellent context setting, 193 countries as signatories and 17 goals and the indicators and the sub-goals that Nick mentioned. It's also interesting that there's some overriding themes across all 17 goals. And as Nick mentioned, they include gender equity, alleviating extreme poverty, climate, access to health, and education. So these are kind of important to kind of think about that as you select a goal or you select a group of goals, there's some overriding themes that may also help. It's also really important that we realize that as a result of COVID, our job of reaching these goals has been made harder. And that's unfortunate, but it also, I think, is an opportunity to bring us together and really make this guideline, this framework of the global goals real. During COVID, we've seen another 71 million people fall below the extreme poverty lines of $2 or less a day. Here in the United States, we actually have seen an increase in children who are now below the poverty line. In fact, 1 in 5 are now estimated to be below the U.S. poverty line. We've also seen setbacks, in gender equality. We've also seen setbacks in employment and climate. So our job has never been even more important than it is today. There are many organizations, including Village Enterprise, Mercy Corps, World Vision, UNICEF, Direct Relief, Save the Children, many local organizations here in the U.S. and around the world, and also many corporations like Unilever and Pfizer who have adopted the goals as a driving global framework. So we're not alone. When I think about the giving circles, I think you have such a unique opportunity to help the whole world achieve these goals. Not only can you help with the $2 trillion gap each year, but also I believe that this may be one of the greatest movements of global citizens that we have seen in our lifetime, meaning Giving Circle members, because these are individuals who have chosen to commit to things beyond themselves and to be active in making it a better world. And what better framework than the global goals for this really important, if you will, asset of global citizens. I'll finish my time by sharing with you that I think it's so important that each of us make a personal connection to these goals. It certainly has been important to me, as Kaisen was kind enough to mention. The book, Take Me With You, is in the store. And that book that I wrote was really about connecting my own personal story to the global goals. The title comes from the fact that my mother was an abused spouse. And every day when she would try to escape that situation, I would say, take me with you. She finally did and married a Black Baptist minister in 1968 before it was legal to actually have an interracial marriage in Kansas. Now, all heck broke loose. In fact, we were forced to leave. We were losing a custody battle, and they again chose to take me with them. And we went to Canada, where we didn't have work permits, ultimately made our way down to the state of Washington. They found us through the school system, took me back by armed escort, held my mother for kidnapping. I then ran away again in the snowstorms of Kansas back to the state of Washington, where Jefferson and Sidney had taken it to the Supreme Court of the state of Washington and overturned it on the grounds of race. And I tell that story because many years later, I was on the border of Uganda and Gulu and was with the invisible children, thousands of them coming together one night. And a little girl grabbed my hand, and I looked down, and she said, "My name is Rose, take me with you." And I think it's just so important for all of us to realize that our stories count, because that's how we make a connection to these goals. For me, it means that I really care about women and children in poverty, children who choose, hopefully, the love instead of the anger, and that all of us have a role in doing that. So I really encourage you, because I think this is a very significant movement. Giving Circles are global citizens, and I hope that you'll make the time to connect your personal story to these goals. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Scott, so much for deeply inspiring us and sharing your personal story and showing that there is a connection between what we do as individuals and what is good for the entire world. My next question is for Dianne and Veena, and maybe Veena, we'll start with you. Can you tell us more about how the relationship with Village Enterprise started? How did it develop?
You have to remember sometimes to unmute yourself. So thank you, Nick. And at first, I wanted to just describe what it is that Together Women Rise does, and then I will tell the story of our relationship with Village Enterprise and Dianne. So Together Women Rise, we were formerly Dining for Women. We changed our name in March of this year, and so it's okay for anybody to slip up. We are a giving circle, but we are different in many ways. We have grown a lot in the 18 years that we have been in existence. We consist of about 450 chapters across the country, and then who come together and learn about a grantee that we are funding in any particular given month, and they send their money to Together Women Rise, and then we fund the grantee. So there's this kind of different levels of giving circle, and different levels of community, and different levels of making a difference. Some of the things that we look for in nonprofits, which is the story that we can also tell with the success of Village Enterprise, is when we are looking for whom to fund, we are looking for nonprofits that work in certain communities and they work at the grassroots level. It is extremely important in trying to attain the SDGs that we fund real solutions that are homegrown, solutions that rise up from the community. Like the other speakers have said, the SDGs are completely interrelated. Gender equity, gender equality kind of intermingle with all 17 of them. So when Village Enterprise is funding a poverty alleviation and entrepreneur project, they are creating ripple effects of families that can now afford education for their young girls. And if the schools that have been built do not have water, then there are issues of school attendance because of menstrual hygiene and things. So there are ripple effects on how you seek a grantee, how you seek the solutions that they are seeking to fund, and then how they can grow up to scale. So our story with Village Enterprise started a long time ago when Together Women Rise was also much smaller and had a less capacity for funding. Started off in 2006 with a small grant of $4,305. As we grew, as we got to know more about the impact that Village Enterprise is having, we funded them again in 2011 with a grant of $39,000. And then, as most of you know, nonprofits are better served if they can get long-term funding. So we established something called a sustained grant, which was for $45,000 in this case for 3 years. So that helps nonprofits to function, helps them to plan, helps them to build capacity. Dianne, I'll stop there so you can tell your story of how all this emerged, and then we can go a little bit back and forth about what are some of the important things for giving circles to look for and how nonprofits can project themselves and make the most of what they do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Veena. And thank you, Nick, for moderating this panel. It's a thrill to be on this panel. And, you know, when I think of our partnership with Together Women Rise, you know, I think it's emblematic of the partnership that is so important between a nonprofit and Giving Circles. And that is that it is a long-term partnership. Together Women Rise and Village Enterprise have been partnering for 15 years. And that just, you know, I think really demonstrates the impact that a Giving Circle can have over the long term. Village Enterprise is a nonprofit. As Kyson mentioned, our mission is to end extreme poverty in rural Africa through entrepreneurship and innovation. And as Veena mentioned, we're a community-led organization. Our local staff work with first-time entrepreneurs living in extreme poverty. Most of them are women, and we equip them with all the resources and skills to start small businesses and savings group. And with the income from their businesses, our entrepreneurs are able to feed their families more nutritious meals, send their children to school, access healthcare services for the first time, and save for the future. So our work positively impacts the top 5 sustainable development goals of ending poverty, ending hunger and improving nutrition, ensuring good health, ensuring access to education, and achieving gender equality. We also work with conservation partners like Wildlife Conservation Society to address SDGs 13 and 15, which are focused on climate and conservation through climate smart businesses and conservation training for our entrepreneurs. And as I mentioned, and Veena also mentioned, that this relationship with Together Women Rise has evolved from the early years when Together Women Rise gave Village Enterprise small grants to help fund our program, to later grants where they actually helped fund sort of the development of our organization, and now to working together more broadly around the effort of advocacy to promote the SDGs and to advocate for better policies that will ultimately help us to achieve the SDGs. And so I think that's where we're really getting really major scale. And I think the model of Giving Circles is highly effective in providing NGOs like Village Enterprise with many of the resources they need. I think sometimes we think of Giving Circles as just giving money, but just as important, they provide a social network to raise the organization's visibility more broadly. I've had the opportunity to speak to chapters of Together Women Rise around the United States. So we now have donors from all 50 states, and in large part that started with Together Women Rise. We also have a pool of volunteers who have become advisors, board members, and volunteers for our work. 3, we have a partner to advocate our mission of ending extreme poverty. So I really think of Together Women Rise as a partner, you know, around our mission. And then finally, the financial resources. And we've worked with many Giving Circles over the last 10 years. In addition to Together Women Rise, we've worked with Caridad Partners, Women Walking, Project Redwood, Founders Pledge, and most recently with SV2, Silicon Valley Social Venture Fund. And all of those organizations have really contribute to our significant growth. Veena mentioned when they gave us the first grant in 2006, Village Enterprise had a $300,000 budget. And next year we'll have a $10 million budget. And I really attribute a lot of that growth to the help of Giving Circles and all of the many resources they've provided Village Enterprise. So thank you all in the audience for being members of Giving Circles or for supporting Giving Circles. And thanks very much to Together Women Rise for the partnership we have.
Nick, will you allow me to make a few more points?
Please.
Sure. So, so for those of you who are Giving Circles out there, you need to do great research to find that little engine that could, that is really solving problems out there. But to the nonprofits, since I speak to so many of them, you may be a very small nonprofit that is doing wonderful work, and you need to be heard and you need to be seen. Some of the easiest way to do that is to communicate really well on your website. Dianne talked about the range of work that they have done, and today they're doing RCTs, randomized controlled trials. Those may be very expensive for an organization to do, and you may be a really small organization. Consider partnering with an academic institution. Academics and students love to do research, and they can do that for you. So there are ways in which you can collaborate. You can have partnerships where you can make the most of being the little engine that could, but having a really powerful voice. And then, of course, find the Giving Circle. Find the Giving Circle that raises your visibility, that increases your exposure, that, you know, we have invited so many of our grantees to different events at the UN, the Commission on Status of Women, other events that we have in regions. You never know whom you may meet. You never know whom you may speak to that can really emphasize what you're doing. And lastly, never underestimate digital communication, social media, and the power of a video. A well-made video to communicate your M&E can be very powerful, so that you can speak to the audience who really are compassionate and very interested in wanting to invest in you. So I would say Giving Circles rock.
I couldn't agree with you on that more, Veena. Yeah, and I want to say, I think I can. I think I could. So appreciate you bringing that up. Before we move to Ina, could I just ask, have you, how is that I mean, Dianne, you mentioned that you started with addressing one, but you're actually addressing several SDGs, and that kind of seeing that how they come together really helps you. But I'm wondering if that has helped the relationship between either specifically with Together Women Rise or also with the other Giving Circles you work with.
Yeah, I think that Giving Circles and funders and donors in general want to see the impact of their resources. And I think more importantly, increasingly people want to see sustainable impact, right? So they don't want to just see a one-time impact. And I think that the approach that Village Enterprise takes is we're trying to help people become self-sufficient, and by helping them start small businesses and participate in savings groups and get access to formal financial institutions, we can impact so many of the SDGs. We're really helping build the community infrastructure, and then also helping individuals be able to provide for their families. And then I think what Veena mentioned earlier, which is also critical, is Village Enterprise has always really focused on doing good monitoring and evaluation of our program, so that it's not just a good story you get. We do have some great stories to tell, but we also have good data to back up those good stories, so that we can really show, that our entrepreneurs, for example, experience significant 71% increase in income and over 300% increase in savings. So across those SDGs, by having that income and savings we're addressing the issues of hunger, access to education and healthcare, and gender equality as well, since most of the people we work with are women.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Ina, if I could turn to you. So we're hearing of more giving circles use the SDG framework to be strategic about their grant making. Could you walk us through how NEID decided to use that framework and what has been done to date? You're on mute.
Myself, I always watch
go.
other people do that, but here I am. Hello, everybody. So this is so interesting. So I run a donor network called New England International Donors out of Boston. We currently have about 180 members that are actually from across the country. And our mission is to support individual and family foundation donors in their efforts to address the world's big problems. And many of them, like Scott, have found some connection to a place that they've traveled to in either their work or for pleasure, and are looking for ways to connect in a helpful manner and to make a difference in the world. So the SDGs really provide our members and us as those helping and supporting them as a very useful framework through which we can provide our educational content. And it also, and I think this is equally important, enables our members to sort of see how their giving connects to the giving of everyone else, whether it's the World Bank or the Ford Foundation or whatever it may be, because you are contributing in some small way to this, or even in a big way, to the larger international effort to address climate change, support women and girls, et cetera, et cetera. New England International Donors offers a broader content of about 50 different programs across the year. And our giving circles, we run 2 of them annually, are about 14 of those sessions, and they run between December and June. And they're hosted by Grapevine, who I know is also part of the We Give Summit, great partner. They are by far the most popular of our educational content programs because they offer sort of a longer term and a deep dive into specific issues. Many individual donors don't have the backing of, say, a Mott Foundation, where there's, hundreds of people providing advice about what is the most appropriate way to give or how to give, at this moment or in this context. So our circles offer 7 sessions. We often start by giving our members sort of an overview of a particular SDG. If it's women and girls, sort of what are the different facets of this issue? How has the international community or other funders, how have they contributed? Where are the gaps in giving, and where can you make a difference? So for our members, what it essentially means is it's a way to help understand how to give internationally, how to be strategic and impactful in our giving. It's an opportunity also to get to know other individual donors who are giving on that subject with similar interests, and ultimately to find partners in giving. And it's an opportunity to get to know grantees. Just like with Together Give and Rise, we provide ways that people can really understand who's operating in this space. What are some different types of interventions when it comes to different SDGs? So New England International Donors has, since 2017, offered 9 giving circles, I believe it is in total. 3 on women and girls, 4 focused on SDG 13, which is climate action, and 2 focused on SDG 10, reduced inequalities. within each of those SDGs, I mean, the circle members often drive which aspect of it they want to focus on. So within SDG 5, women and girls, we've explored the role of men in changing gender norms. We've explored trafficking. We've explored maternal health. And within those, always sort of understanding, how are funders contributing to this? What gaps are there? How can we as individuals really make a difference on this subject? We've also held within SDG 13, we've explored green carbon versus blue carbon. What does that mean? The intersection between climate change and health, climate and social justice movements. And then we've this year held a circle on clean water. And then on SDG 10, we've hosted a circle on refugees. And then this year we have a circle on how to give with a racial justice lens. I think often our circles are ultimately giving to smaller organizations, and in the process of learning how to address these issues, we are also providing practice to people in terms of what kind of impact can you have in this setting, or how are you having an impact looking at people's budgets, looking at how to evaluate on this particular issue. So it's either smaller organizations where a grant of 20,000 can make a huge difference and jumpstart them into a larger process, or it's bridge funding that most of our circles end up giving to. I would sort of end with this year, our racial justice circle was particularly popular because it provided donors an understanding of how to give with a racial justice lens. It gave them the vocabulary and how it's relevant, and understanding of how it's relevant in the international context versus in the United States. And it gave them practice in actually evaluating organizations with a racial justice lens, or ultimately having an impact. So through our circles, every year we give between $70,000 and $150,000. Our impact is much greater, though, if you think about that the circles really are providing all the members of the circle a way to improve their grant making, which ultimately our members collectively are giving over $100 million annually, and through to hundreds of organizations across the world.
Wonderful. Ina, thank you so much. I mean, I really love this matter that you're saying. You were showing that it offers a connection, right? That the organizations that receive, they can feel themselves as also contributing to a larger whole, that the donors also might say, this is something that we're working on together with others beyond us. And that's not just a counting thing of how many dollars are going. That's an inspirational thing. That's something that provides a kind of a common language to share. I want to encourage anybody, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. We'd love for you for our panelists to respond to those. Now, while we're waiting for any such question, I just want to point out, you mentioned racial justice. We had been working on that with community foundations at the Mott Foundation, but we're also trying to support the integration of SDGs in their work. So it's about the community foundations and how they might integrate that. Because what we found was that, community foundations in the US, at least several, were saying, oh gosh, now you're wanting us to talk about the SDGs. We're all focused on COVID, or we're focused on combating racism, and here's this other thing. And by the way, there is no SDG for racial equity. It is embedded in so many things, not only SDG 10, reducing inequalities. But so the thing I put up might help you find ways to integrate that. I want to, while we're waiting, quickly go back to Scott and ask you that how are you seeing the SDGs helping you besides the personal story, but in that global to local connection, local to global?
Yeah, I think they are very important. For example, one of the programs that we work with is called the Girls First Fund. And it's 13 foundations that have come together and pooled funding to give to community-based organizations, women-led, around the world to reduce and hopefully eliminate early child marriage. And so that goal, kind of comes back up to gender equity and some of the other goals, but they are able to think about it locally, right on the ground, very, very small organizations in their communities. And the great thing about that project, and I think the whole notion of global to local, is really putting the trust in the partner. In these small organizations, they really have an opportunity to say what they need the most and what they can do, and different methodologies for reducing child marriage. So I think the global to local is certainly tied to a greater trust-based philanthropy, which I know Giving Circles have been huge advocates for. But that global to local is all about putting the trust into local organizations and letting them suggest the right models to meet those SDG goals.
Beautiful. And I love that you brought in that they can be a way to enhance trust, actually, or to help it. I'm wondering, Vina, do you have a comment on that? And how that might fit into how Together Women Rise actually also do a lot of things outside, but also do things very locally.
I think that is part of our values and ethos. I mean, we've always been an organization that valued grassroots solutions to any kind of a problem. And so we have always, in our selection of a grantee, prioritized how the grantee approaches a problem locally. Also, our focus on women and girls, especially those living below the poverty line, is like we were looking for organizations that always spoke to the voices of their beneficiaries in their problem solving. So you can hear it and see it, and you know that those are the solutions that are more sustainable over time. And so you know that these things are all intermingled. For instance, if you're working in a rural area and most of the women beneficiaries that the organization is working with are farmers. I mean, women produce most of the food in the world today. And so dealing with their issues, hearing their voices, you may be tackling in a very small way, but you may be tackling some really big issues like climate change, the issues of deforestation, the issues of firewood, the issues of rainwater harvesting, and the issues of small little things at a local level, but having a really huge impact on the global level. So never to underestimate the power of these little solutions that are happening in local communities. Sometimes the top-down solutions are not listening necessarily to the cultural context or to the local context. And so things get blurry and they don't reach the goals that they would typically attain. So I think the sustainable development goals, like all the speakers have said, really provide a wonderful framework to work on projects, whether it is on a macro scale or whether it's on a micro scale, but to kind of value the solution that is happening in every local community or global community.
That is beautifully said. Thank you, Rena. So I've had to come to that, been on this journey myself of it's not just, these big global goals and they're coming down to me globally, but it's also a way to say, look, this is what we do here. And it actually does matter even going that way as well. I wonder about, the idea of horizontal connection. Diana, could you, say, because you work with so many different, Village Enterprise has many places, and have you seen this kind of like cross learning, and have the SDGs helped you in that from community to community that you work in?
Yeah, I think that is part of our mission is, we're working to end extreme poverty through entrepreneurship and innovation. And innovation happens at the grassroots level, right? We're not a top-down kind of organization in terms of our innovation. We do our innovation with a human-centered design approach. So all of the innovations that come from the field and then get shared across all of our communities, all of our countries that we're working in. So just to give you an example, so Village Enterprise has been working in Kenya and Uganda and rural villages for many years. And we have this evidence-based model now. There was a cyclone that hit Mozambique, and World Vision was given funding by USAID. Traditionally, the way the funding would work is they would, bring in aid, like food and water and help cyclone victims in that way. But World Vision asked Village Enterprise to come in and train their staff on our models so that we could help cyclone victims really lift themselves out of poverty after this horrible disaster. And so there is this cross-learning that's happening, across countries, across organizations. And I think the reason that that's happening is because there is an interest now in sharing the best practices across organizations, and that's happening in lots of different groups.
No, super. I mean, so in that spirit of sharing, we got a question from the audience, and if you can maybe close us out because we're going to have to end very quickly. So what was your one tip that you would give to Giving Circle to get started on this kind of SDG journal?
Yeah, I just put it into the chat. I mean, it's very easy to start a circle. It's basically just a community of people coming together, meeting on a regular basis, talking about what they want to give at. And I pointed to Grapevine because they have a searchable database of all organizations that are registered here in the United States, but it includes organizations that are working internationally. And they will actually also help you with giving the money. So that's a good place.
Beautiful. And I will quickly add before turning it over to Kai-san that if you want to start on a journey to help advance the SDGs, talk to Philanthropy Together and their Launchpad, and I'm sure they will help with that as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Kai-san, back to you.
Thanks, Nick. We appreciate all the panelists for all their insights, expertise. It really was such a meaty conversation, and we look forward to following all your work. Please do follow them either on social media or going to their websites. We did drop that in the chat. But other than that, we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Our next session is Giving Circles and Social Justice Movements, Exploring the Greatest Possibilities in a Time of Civic Awakening and Political Openings. And our other session, Strengthening Connections, a discussion on interfaith giving. Those are all at 1 p.m. at Eastern Time. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.